What's the weirdest sex act you've ever done alone? I had heard about CCK rings, the rubber ones and the plastic/metal ones, and heard they make you harder for longer, so decided to try and improvise one day when my mom and sister went out. I found a metal ring that went on a curtain pole and had a little plastic clip on, so I removed that and got some cooking oil and went into my room, greased up the ring and slid it over my semi-flaccid knees and BLLS. It felt pretty good, so I grabbed a magazine and started to rub one out. The ring slowly moved further back, restricting blood flow and wedging itself tight against my BLLS and base of my DCK. This thing was tight, and I suppose it was doing its job until after I came and wanted it to slide off. It wouldn't. It was there, right against my purple DCK and BLLS for 30 minutes before Mom came home. I couldn't budge it. I was in pain, so I had to call her. The look of utter horror, disbelief, disgust in her eyes will stay with me forever. By this time my DCK was the color number 301934 and I was in severe pain. My mom immediately called my dad. He drove from work, about 10 minutes, came upstairs, took one look at me, got some Vaseline from the bathroom, which I wish I had known about earlier. He got a thin piece of plastic and put Vaseline on it and slid it under the ring and kind of levered it a bit. The blood drained and my member subsided. He handed me a towel, ruffled my hair, picked up the ring, shut my bedroom door and went back to work. We never talked about it again. Every year I help my dad with Christmas lights. I climb up on the roof and carefully clip all of the lights onto the peaks. I grew up in a conservative house and only recently discovered how nice masturbating can be. Did you know that orgasms can help relieve period cramps? Who knew? Well, I have a particular fondness for the cowgirl position with my BF, but it absolutely destroys my knees. Sitting on my knees on a flat, even if it's soft, surface is difficult for me. So here I am, sitting on the warm roof, hanging lights on my house, when my dad walks inside to get something. I'm straddling a roof peak, all alone. The neighborhood is quiet and I can see there's no one outside. I'm at an angle where I can't be seen from the ground anyway. My knees are at the perfect angle to not hurt in this position, and suddenly thoughts of the BF enter my head. I just start rocking back and forth on the peak of my roof. When my dad came back out, I was in a much better mood. Not the act itself, I guess, but the event as a whole. We lived in the sticks, and internet shopping wasn't really a thing back then. Not that we had internet anyway. I was a HRNY but resourceful teenage girl, so I whittled myself a nice light dildo out of a piece of firewood, sanded it, and varnished it. I was around 14 to 15 at the time. I tested it out once without a condom, and freaked out about the potential toxicity of the varnish. Then used a disposable latex glove, because there were no condoms in the house, and the thought of buying them was mortifying. In the end, I was too paranoid about it being found, so I tossed it into the fire the next time the fireplace was lit. When I was in middle school, I ended up in-school suspension, where I was essentially locked in a supply closet with a desk in it for a week and a half. The supply closet was connected to the principal's office, but no one really came in to check on me besides at lunchtime when it was mandatory to bring their closet prisoners food. Anyways, that closet turned into my masturbatorium. Very important masturbatory studies and experiments were conducted in my time there. Very scientific and groundbreaking work was headed by myself and my assistant right-hand woman. Great assistant and still with me to this day. Years later, when I was in high school, I returned to speak with the new principal of that middle school about supplies for a club project I was working on. I went into the closet where the desk was to gather a few boxes she prepared for me. Lo and behold, I noticed, for the very first time, a camera trained right on the fucking desk. To this day, I have no idea if that camera was there while I was in there. It's the exact same as the rest of the cameras in that school, so I feel like it has been. I've told this before, and it'll get buried again. But for anyone sorting by new, here goes. I was 16, my first job was at a wedding venue, working as a server during the receptions and then helping out with cleanup afterward. This was a pretty ritzy place, and we had to have the floors looking like mirrors before we went home. That took hours with a buffer/washer, stripping it down to get rid of the dancer's scuff marks and then building it up with layers of wax. The handle of the buffer was adjustable, and being a small chick I found it easiest to control if I sort of wedged into the top of my pelvis. That way I could use my ugly little boy hips to move it around. No upper body strength needed. One night, the buffer either malfunctioned or worked better than ever before, depending on if you were asking my boss or my lady parts. It vibrated like it was about to fall apart, due to an improperly installed brush head. I didn't mind though. As soon as I tucked that sucker's handle up onto my pelvis, the most wonderful things started happening in the region just a couple of inches below that. I looked around, did a quick adjustment to lower the handlebar just a tad, and then fired that big boy up. 10 minutes of that, and my eyes were permanently rolled back into my head. My entire middle body, from my knees to my floating ribs, was a throbbing pool of liquid pleasure. Every couple of seconds, the eccentric rotation of the misaligned brush would throw one big vibration in, making my hips buck and my breath to freeze in my chest. I vowed to strip wax off of every floor in the greater Chesterfield metropolitan area. I was going to marry that buffer. I was going to write Mrs. Clark Buffer in my Trapper Keeper at school the next Monday. I loved that buffer. And then I realized that I had an audience. Half of the rest of the crew was standing at the kitchen door watching me nuke my genitals with the handle of an industrial floor polisher. I instantly pushed the thing away from me, losing control. It spun wildly, wrapping the cord around itself and flipping over onto the floor, spraying wet soapy water all over the place. Thankfully, all the tables were pushed up against the other side of the room. I was pretty embarrassed, but I soldiered on, unwinding the cord and going back to stripping the floor as if nothing other than a loss of buffer control had occurred. I caught a little ribbing about it, but my boss put an end to it pretty quickly. Which makes sense, you don't let your crew get that raunchy around a 16-year-old girl. And apparently, I was not the first to discover the joys of buffer-induced vibrations. Over the next few weeks, a couple of the other female members of the crew related their stories about how they had found out that a slight adjustment of the pad and handle could make wonderful things happen. They were just a little better about not pulling a When Harry Met Sally moment while their coworkers watched. TLDR, found out that a floor buffer can produce strong vibrations that can be transmitted to one's crotch area via the handle. Enjoyed an extended period of bliss while stripping a floor, without realizing that I was putting on a show for my coworkers. Totally worth it. I kind of have this fetish where the idea of being experimented on, or being the product of a Frankenstein's monster kind of experiment, is a big turn on. I also have a fetish for being forced to drink liquids, so one day I decided to try combining the two. I set up some spooky green lights in my living room, then take some plastic tubing I have from other hobbies and make myself a siphon, with one end down my throat a little ways, and the other in a big-ass cup of Gatorade sitting on a table above me. May as well hydrate, am I right? I laid down on my back, with a towel under me, and just kind of let the siphon go. It didn't last long. The weight changed so rapidly the tubing pulled the glass over, spilling the like half-gallon of Gatorade all over me and my carpet. I had put towels down, but it was just so much it still soaked through. So here I am, sitting in the middle of my living room, naked, covered in Gatorade like in shoal. It wasn't a highlight of my solo soul exploits, but it's a good story I don't ever get to tell, lol.